U.S. President Donald Trump is once again going after the, quote, failing New York Times. The president took to Twitter to accuse the New York Times of virtual treason for alleging that the United States was increasing cyber attacks on Russia. Now, that initial report by the New York Times, which said the U.S. is escalating online attacks against Russia's power grid, ran on Saturday. For more on whether or not we are entering a new era of cyber warfare, we are joined by former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras. Jim, firstly, it's good to be with you. Secondly, what exactly is this New York Times report alleging?
What they're saying is, and I think there's an interesting clue in there, they said this is a classified aspect of something that's already been made public under some new authorities, supposedly to retaliate against Russia for interfering in the 2016 election, and we know how bogus that is, but also as a shot across their bow to warn them against future meddling or attacks on our grid. So what it's really saying is we are using malware, we are using cyber means to, in effect, sabotage.
To show them we mean business.
Show them we mean business. We can, and look, I hope I'm not going to be accused of myself divulging classified information. Countries do these things to each other all the time. They conduct espionage, they hack, they insert malware. There is a cyber war going on among dozens of countries, and it's the kind of thing you'd think, hopefully, there could be some kind of agreement to control, like we do with, let's say, nuclear weapons, although those agreements are all being torn down, too. So I think this is a new zone of uncontrolled, under-the-table kicking cyber warfare that is only getting worse and worse.
So I did notice that when the Trump administration put out its, national security agenda in this past year, they heavily specified cyber warfare and, increased technological dominance as a priority for the administration. But in terms of international law, are we dealing with anything illegal here? Because if you're attacking another country's power grid, I mean, you're a former diplomat. Can you give us any clarity as to whether or not we might see, the UN get involved if these allegations are true?
Well, certainly the UN will not get involved. The UN is a powerless organization. The only thing in the UN that's worth anything is the Security Council, but that depends on consensus. And since there's no consensus among
the got a veto on that.
And so do the Russians, so do the Chinese, since they don't agree on these things. Now, maybe the Russians and the Chinese would say, fine, let's negotiate this, let's have an agreement. But is it a kind of an aggression? Is it a violent act through other means against another country? I would say that it is, but maybe it's not the kind of thing that's encompassed under the traditional rules of diplomacy.
Something we found interesting here at the News with Rick Sanchez is that a lot of journalists and pundits or whoever ended up being called conspiracy theorists for alleging that the U.S. may have attacked Venezuela's power grid.
Sure.
But now we know, at least for certain, that we have the technology to do so. Whether or not the U.S. actually did that to Venezuela is still in question. Do you see any hypocrisy here, especially from the New York Times, who's been very pro-intervention by the U.S. on Venezuela?
Well, I hope there's a silver lining there, that maybe their Trump derangement syndrome has gone so far they'll actually end up telling the truth for a change. I can't help wondering if there is some classified aspect to this information. Are they going to get Julian Assange here? Somehow, I don't think so. I don't know where any of that is going to go, to tell the truth. I think we're entering an uncharted territory here, and I would hope that's. I guess my fear is, when you look at militarization of space, you look at cancellation of arms control agreement, deployments in Poland, it seems that certainly our side is preparing to fight what the national security strategy calls a peer competition. In other words, a global war.
Well, the militarization of space was also justified based on Russia and China ramping up their weapons. But those two countries actually agreed not to put any weapons in space. And similarly here, I mean, they just did last week. Similarly here, it's like you see us saying that we have the power to attack Russia's power grid, but then do we have the right to call foul when Russia attacks our power grid? It's almost like we're bragging.
Well, when we have the rules to preemptively absolve ourselves from any accusation, as you gave example in Venezuela, at the same time to automatically place judgment on another country like Iran over the Gulf of Oman, we want to be one of the players. We also want to be the referee. So we give ourselves a mulligan whenever we're accused of something, but the other country is automatically guilty because we say so. How do you conduct diplomacy in that kind of atmosphere? You say the Russians and the Chinese have agreed not to put weapons in space. Frankly, they're going to be forced to. Because if we're going to militarize space and have bombs hanging over their head, they're going to have to do the same thing. Is that in our interest? I don't think so.
We want to be the player, but we also want to be the referee. I think that's a great line. Jim Jatras, thanks a lot.
I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.